Absolutely love caricatures of classic Hollywood actors. There are a lot of cartoons that do this, and when they're done well, they're an absolute delight. So I was really looking forward to Hollywood Steps Out, which is the 1941 Warner Brothers Merrie Melodies cartoon directed by Tex Avery. And according to Wikipedia, this caricatures over 40 Hollywood celebrities. I could identify maybe 10 of them. But to be fair, it's not necessarily the fact that the ones I couldn't identify were bad caricatures. There are just a couple of actors whose names no longer carry as much weight as they did, and I'm not that familiar with their work. I'm not going to spoil too much. In fact, I won't for the moment say who was caricatured, because for me that was part of the excitement. I didn't look on Wikipedia or IMDb before watching it, because I wanted the thrill of trying to work out who they were meant to be. But towards the end, with a spoiler warning, I will say which ones my favourites were, or which ones I thought were the most well done. But this is set in a nightclub in Hollywood, what was then a famous night called, I believe, pronounced Ciro's nightclub. I've never actually heard it pronounced or spoken out loud. I've only ever read about it. But it was a nightclub on Sunset Boulevard that was quite popular, and we have all of these Hollywood celebrities, mostly actors, um, going about their business. Some of them are actually working there rather than just enjoying themselves there. But a lot of them are, of course, patrons of the club, and they interact with each other, and a lot of the references are towards characters they've played rather than themselves. A lot of them, when they're named in the short, they're named by the characters' names, which I thought was a nice way of kind of distancing themselves, or rather, the animators distancing the true identities of the caricatures from the real people, or from the caricatures themselves, because sometimes people can understandably file lawsuits against cartoons that try and caricature them, claiming that it's painting them in a bad light. But by referring to them mostly as their characters, or by making reference to films they've been in, they could argue that they're caricaturing the characters in those films rather than the people themselves. As I said, I recognised about 10 of them. There were maybe an additional 5 or so that when I read the names on Wikipedia afterwards, I kind of thought, okay, I know who that is, but I don't think that caricature quite looked like the person themselves. But for the most part, I'd say the ones that I recognised and knew were pretty decent. They weren't perfect. If you showed me a picture of that person, or if you showed me that caricature and didn't tell me it was a caricature, I wouldn't have went, oh, that looks like that actor. But when you have that kind of recognition and you're actively trying to identify them, yes, you can kind of make the connection between them. There's one that's blatantly obvious, which I will, again, discuss at the end. I think the narrative actually worked well. Having it set in the nightclub rather than, say, on a film set meant that they could really play around with the scenarios and the situations, and the music for it, of course, was very good as well. Music is by the brilliant Carl W. Starling. So the narrative worked well. The animation was pretty decent. I mean, the animation quality in general is very sharp. With regards to the quality of the caricatures, by no means are they the best that I've seen. Other studios from around the time have caricatured, and I think maybe a little bit better. And I think maybe the selection of actors wasn't the best. Some of them, yes, some of them worked really well, but some of them I feel like didn't have that many distinguishing features. And there are certainly people they could have chosen from around the time, or even shortly before, who I think would have worked better, or would have visually been more appealing. But it's certainly something that's very enjoyable to watch if you're a fan of classic Hollywood. It's good fun. I had fun trying to identify people, and it didn't bother me that I couldn't identify everybody, because the ones that I could identify were pretty entertaining. Okay, so, spoilers from now. I'm about to mention a couple that stood out to me as being either well done or just quite frankly very easy to identify. And I think the ones for me that were definitely the easiest were Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney. Basically because they looked like they were children. They looked younger than all of the other characters, and just instantly I could tell it was them. They played in a lot of pictures together. It made sense that they were caricatured in the same scene or at the same moment at the same table. And honestly, I don't think they look very much like Mickey Rooney or Judy Garland, but because they were paired together and they do look younger than everybody else, instantly they were recognisable. I thought James Cagney was definitely recognisable. I instantly recognised James Cagney. And honestly, I didn't recognise Greta Garbo. I'm a big fan of Greta Garbo's films. The caricature, now that I know it's her, looking back, I kind of think, okay, I can see you being Greta Garbo, but I've seen such better caricatures of Garbo that it just didn't even twig in my mind that that's who she was meant to be. I think Harpo Marx and Groucho Marx were both brilliant. They worked very well. And Boris Karloff as Frankenstein's monster. Needless to say, when Frankenstein's monster or Frankenstein's creature kind of shuffled across the dance floor, it was definitely very recognisable. Obviously the most recognisable of them all. So I thought it was good fun. Some of them weren't that great. For example, Cary Grant. I don't think Cary Grant's that caricaturable. Certainly as a known name, it would have been weird if he hadn't been in this, because he was obviously one of the biggest stars around the time. But in terms of being caricaturable, I don't think his striking, yes, but I don't think he's got that many distinguishable features in terms of being turned into a caricature. So I'm just assuming that's why I didn't recognise that it was meant to be Cary Grant. But when you watch it back and you know who some of the other people are that you didn't recognise, you may find that you kind of roll your eyes and think, yes, actually now I know it, I can see it. Which just means that when you watch it for a second time, you'll have a completely different viewing. I did watch it a second time, and the treatment of Greta Garbo was certainly a very interesting one. It's definitely a lot of fun. If you're a fan of classic Hollywood, it's something you're going to love. Thoroughly recommend Hollywood Steps Out.